Marcos was a very reserved boy, few friends, but he was a person suffered by the blows of life. He had a scar on his face due to a fall in his childhood, where he never knew how to explain how he stumbled on something he did not see. He lost his mother in adolescence due to a stroke, was raised by his father who became an alcoholic after the loss of his wife. Marcos worked from an early age, helped everyone he could, and never understood why so many bad things happened in his life. At the age of 25, his father was also the victim of a stroke, leaving serious consequences, making the already complicated life Marcos' life would get more difficult. In just over 3 years bedridden, his father died. Marcos no longer had any close relatives. He started to live alone with his faithful dog Toby. He was the only friend left, the few he had left without apparent reason, and Marcos did not understand the reason for all that. Once, walking around town looking for a job, he was stopped by a lady who looked about 40 years old or so, and looked at him scared. Marcos, always polite, asked if he could help with something. The lady said that please, let him go to a spiritist center where she worked, because she needed to talk to him seriously. Despite being a person who always helped those in need, Marcos was not at all religious, perhaps due to lack of time, of his difficult life, but due to the insistence of the lady he promised to attend the place. On the night he agreed to attend the spiritist center, a sudden and severe headache made him almost give up, but he was a person of his word, and he did. Upon arriving at the spiritist center, he was received by the lady he met on the street, who said that her name was Maria, and that she really needed to talk to him. So she asked him if he knew a blonde woman, with shoulder-length hair, very blue eyes, very thin. Marcos said that he didn't remember anyone like that, because he didn't have any friends, and he was curious about the reason for the question. Mrs. Maria said that when she saw him pass the day before on the street, she saw a woman with this appearance beside her, but she looked like a suffering person. She was dirty, and she was staring at him, accompanying him at her side. Marcos was impressed. Although he had no religion, he believed that there was something beyond this life. But what do you think this is? It's because Mrs. Maria said that she asked him to come to the spiritist meeting because she knew that spirit would come along, and she was there, staring at him. Marcos was very uncomfortable, so Mrs. Maria said that she would try to bring that spirit so that she could know what was going on and help her. When the mediums were positioned, each one in their places, many spirits manifested themselves, some asking for help, others not knowing what was happening, others to help, until one of the mediums incorporated a woman's spirit. This spirit showed a lot of anger. The mediums soon positioned themselves around her and began to ask what was going on. The incorporated woman pointed to Marcos, and very angrily said, "He's what's going on," and started laughing. The mediums insisted on the question of why she was doing this, and she, looking fixedly at him, making him shiver, said, "Your father. I loved your father. But he left me for that whore who was his mother. As much as I begged him to stay with me, he preferred her, and you don't know the shock I had when he said he would marry her, and that she was pregnant. I had a fit of rage. I broke everything at home. My parents had to put me in a hospital where I was drugged. But that didn't lessen the hatred I felt for your family, especially for you. You were to be my son, not hers." The mediums tried to persuade that spirit to leave Marcos alone. They tried to explain that he wasn't to blame for anything, but she was irreducible. She seemed out of her mind. She continued, In the hospital I suffered while she had him, and soon I would have you. I swore revenge. I swore to myself that I would destroy one by one until there was no one left. My health deteriorated until one day I heard my parents crying next door from my bed, and I could hear the doctor saying that unfortunately they did everything they could. It seemed like a nightmare. I was there, listening to everything. I wasn't dead. Suddenly I felt a strong dizziness, and as if I was being pulled through a funnel. I immediately found myself in a strange, damp, dark place. I saw people screaming, running from things I couldn't see. Only after a long time did I understand my situation. I was dead, and that certainly wasn't paradise. That it made me even more enraged. In a few days I learned that I could leave there and walk in other places. When I found the way back to my old home, everything was different. It seemed that years had passed, but for me it had been days since everything had happened. It was when I finally found your house, when I saw you, probably around 3 years old, and I saw that woman being hugged by your father. I got so enraged that I went after all of you, but I couldn't hit you with my slaps, which infuriated me the most. I tried everything to destroy you, and little by little I will succeed. Your mother was the first. You have no idea how much I laughed when I saw her in her bed suffering. You don't know what pleasure I had watching your father deteriorate in a hospital bed until he was gone. And you, how do you think you got this scar on your face? Marcos listened to all that astonished. Many things began to make sense. Many things he went through in life. The mediums tried in every way with advice and prayers for that spirit to leave that revenge, but her hatred was so much that nothing made her change your mind. Mrs. Maria advised Marcos not to give up, to always come to the meetings so that the mediums could try to remove and direct that spirit to its destination. Marcos said he would not give up, and indeed he started to attend the meetings, but strangely that spirit did not more manifested itself, although the medium could sometimes see it from a distance looking at them. Marcos kept going to the meetings, but his life didn't change. He began to question the reason for all that, and little by little, a feeling of anger began to form in his heart, a feeling that was increasing since one night, arriving from the meetings, his faithful friend Toby, when crossing the street to welcome him, was run over and unfortunately he couldn't resist. Sadness took over Marcos to the point of making him sick. Perhaps inherited from his parents, he was also affected by a stroke, leaving serious consequences. He could no longer leave the hospital. Mrs. Maria had become a second mother, and I always visited him in the hospital, talked, read books. One afternoon Mrs. Maria received a call from the hospital saying that Marcos' condition had deteriorated a lot. She ran there. When she arrived in the room, a very sad sight. Marcos was really very bad. She said with difficulty that he had called her to thank her for everything she had done for him, until at his side, staring at him, the medium saw that spirit again, very close to Marcos. Senhora Maria asked her to leave, to stop that, because practically her revenge had been consummated, because nothing more could be done for him. The spirit looked at the medium with a sarcastic smile and said, "Nothing will stop me. I want to see him suffer. I want to see him suffer and feel everything I felt in that hospital. I will savor until the last moment." At that moment, the spirit and the medium became silent, and turned their gazes to Marcos, who was staring at the spirit, who this time was as surprised as ever, and said, "I will remember you." A few moments after Marcos said that sentence he seemed to lose consciousness. The doctors came running trying to revive him, but unfortunately without success. Marcos had left. At that moment, the spirit began to feel a strange dizziness, and it seemed that he was being pulled. Same feeling as when he died in the hospital and simply disappeared in front of the medium. Never again did Senhora Maria feel the presence of that spirit, and also, she never managed to get in touch with Marcos' spirit. Maybe he had finally found peace, she thought. After 17 years of all this, one rainy night, Mrs. Maria, who was already an elderly woman, but still in charge of the works at the Spiritist Center, saw a young woman enter the house. She was a little tense. She was blonde and with blue eyes. She heard when the young woman told one of the volunteers at the house that she needed help, and that strange and bad things were happening in her life. Senhora Maria saw something familiar in that girl, but the certainty only came when she saw behind the girl a spirit of a man, who was staring at her, with a lot of anger in his eyes. This spirit had a scar on his face.